you will see clearly that this TV station, this network, has a commitment to championing issues concerning Africa. And so that is why we start our discussions by first looking at the political developments in Africa. And what better place to start than Mali? I mean, Mali is within the West African sub-region. Until the coup d'etat, Mali was part of ECOWAS. Our President John Dramani Mahama is trying all his best and pulling diplomatic levers to try to get the Alliance of Sahel states to rejoin ECOWAS, even with their present position of not being members of ECOWAS. Our president has engaged them because of our common interest, and which borders on security in terms of human security and food security, and the movement of people and goods and services. And so it is important for us to understand that any development in Mali is of interest to not only this network, this TV station, but also to the people of our sub-region, and particularly Ghana. We have a large body of Malians in this our country, Ghana, who are doing various activities and helping to grow our economy. I mean, and so, and that stems largely from the movement of Malians, Nigerians, and Burkinabes into this country stemmed from the deep acknowledgement of the fact that when we gained independence, our first president, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, appreciated and acknowledged the fact that, and he said it on the day we got independence, that our independence was meaningless unless it was linked up with the total liberation of the African continent. I mean, we could not be an island of an independent state in Africa, which was still under colonial domination. And that opened up our country to all persons who were seeking to be independent of colonial domination. And that's why you can see Mugabe and many other African leaders pitch camp in Ghana to try to extricate themselves from colonial rule. So that relationship between us and all these neighboring countries, all African countries, is fundamentally placed on the platform that we see ourselves first as Africans who have a duty towards our fellow Africans. As a lawyer, this news of Mali banning political parties, I read it on a different platform, an international platform, and I was surprised. I will be looking at how the governance, constitutional architecture of Mali is. Because our experience as a country is that when there is a coup d'etat, anytime there was a coup d'etat in this country, two things were bound to happen. One, the dissolution of parliament. Or three things, the dissolution of parliament, which clearly was founded on the suspension of the constitution. Okay, so if the constitution was suspended, parliament was automatically dissolved. And it is the constitution that gives life, or that gives life to political parties. So if the constitution is suspended, all political parties are banned. But the announcements, I mean, anytime the coup d'etat succeeded, the announcements will recite these things. The Constitution, in the case of the 1979 Constitution, the 1979 Constitution has been suspended. Parliament has been banned or dissolved. No political activity. So it came to me as a surprise that since 2021, political parties have been operating in Mali. Under what arrangement, I do not understand. I do not know. Because the constitution of Mali is held in abeyance. It's a constitution that guarantees the elections. It's a constitution that guarantees the presence of political parties for the purposes of cross-fertilization of ideas. And if the constitutional order is not in place, I mean, how a political party, how a system will allow a political party to be in place or political parties to be operating in a military dictatorship is something we need to prove further. But be as it may, last week Saturday, the political parties numbered about 100, and Mali has one of the highest number of political parties. So last week Saturday, the political parties numbering about 100 were able to mobilize their supporters onto the streets, demanding a return to constitutional rule and an end to the military junta. They had also demanded the publication of a timetable for the return of Mali to constitutional rule. And they had stated that Mali should return to constitutional rule by the 31st of December 2025. Now, so the political parties clearly were operating as a pressure group within Mali, putting pressure on the military dictatorship juncture to return the country to constitutional rule. Now, obviously, the attendance was huge. From the reports that I have read, the attendance was huge. And any political system cannot ignore the fact that these political parties were able to marshal and mobilize this number of people onto the streets, demanding an end to the administration of Assimi Goïta. So the military responded, and they responded by first banning political party until further notice. So a prohibition of political activity and tightening the process of the formation of political parties. It appears to me that political parties in Mali are formed largely based on ethnic groups, based on a system that allows them to come into being easily. And so the military junta has also tightened the process of the formation of political parties in Mali. You also appreciate the fact that, like you read, there's beginning to be a political thought that seems to suggest that Assimi Goïta be given an opportunity to rule the country for a period of 5 years in order to bring the necessary level of stability into the country and development before the country returns to constitutional rule. There are many in Mali who don't subscribe to this, and they are those who mobilize to demonstrate against any attempts at putting or leaving Assimi Goïta in power for the next foreseeable future. For me, as an observer of what is happening in Burkina Faso, in Mali, one thing that I can say for sure is that it appears to me that the proscription of political parties in Mali did not come at a brutal cost to the lives of the people. So the demonstration was peaceful. The military did not release tax or the state institutions to crash the demonstration. It appears to me that the military were welcoming of the dissent until they were frightened by the numbers, and that's why they have pulled the plugs and ensured that no further demonstration will take place. Whatever be the case, we have to continue to observe the situation closely and see where that leads us to.
Thank you very much. Remind us that we are also live on YouTube. I see scores of you have joined via that medium. Yes, keep it going. Also on Facebook, you can join us at www.facebook.com/Pan-African Television. Let me now take the thoughts of Comrade Pratt on this issue.
Well, what is happening in Mali is not simple at all. It's very, very complicated. You can look at it from the angle of substance. Substance as opposed to form. You understand? That's one way of looking at it. You can also look at it from the angle of just geopolitics. What are the geopolitical influences and so on. And then beyond that, you can look at it within the ambit of the effort to defeat neocolonialism in West Africa. And there are many other angles. The first that I like to do is to look at it from the point of view of substance versus form. There are so many people who just think that if you have many political parties, then you have democracy. If you have just one political party, then you do not have democracy. There's a problem with this view. Now, in examining this view, it's important to look at the United States of America, which has a multi-party system, dominated largely by two parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. Okay. As we said, it's inconceivable that left-wing parties in the United States will capture power anytime soon. It's inconceivable that the Green Party will capture power anytime soon. And that the American system has been dominated by these two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. The truth of the matter is that the Democrats and Republicans are two sides of the same coin. Whether you vote for a Democratic Party or you vote for the Republican Party, they will all go into Afghanistan and bomb Afghanistan to rust. It doesn't matter. Whether you vote for the Democrats or you vote for the Republicans, they will all invade Iraq and kill 2 million citizens. You understand? Whether you vote for the Democrats or you vote for the Republicans, 1% of the U.S. population will continue to control more than 90% of the total resources of the U.S. So, within that context, this multi-party system is a charade. In substance, it's a one-party state. Now, it gets worse when you look at the laws which operate in the United States of America. And as we speak, under U.S. law, communists are supposed to declare that they are foreign agents. If you become a communist in the United States of America, you are required by law to declare that you are a foreign agent. What that means is that under the law in the United States of America today, communists have no rights at all. At the moment you declare as a foreign agent, you lose all your citizenship rights as well. Now, let's look at the African situation. There are many of our leaders, especially ECOWAS leaders as well, who are telling us that, oh, we should strictly adhere to this bourgeois formula, multi-party democracy and so on. Look at how the multi-party system is operating in West Africa today. Let's take Togo. Today, under some new arrangements, strange arrangements, President Eyadima is no longer elected by universal adult suffrage. Okay? He has become an appointee of parliament. So, universal adult suffrage, to the extent that it contributes to the election of a president, is in jeopardy in Togo. And yet, there are multi-parties contesting for elections. The multi-party system, in its essence, is deformed. You look at La Côte d'Ivoire, and Alassane Ouattara actually amended the constitution to enable him to contest for a third term, with the applause of other West African states and so on. Now you look at La Côte d'Ivoire, and in the last election which brought Ouattara to power, there's clear evidence that the elections was won by Gbagbo, Laurent Gbagbo. And yet with the assistance of French military forces and so on, and a ragtag army, which Giron Soro built, they managed to obtain the verdict of the people and install Ouattara as leader, who has gone beyond the constitutional limit of 2 terms and so on. Is that the multi-party democracy we want? And we can go on and on and on. Indeed, the coup in Mali itself was occasioned by two main reasons: the failure in the fight against the jihadists, and also the attempt to amend the constitution and so on. So when you look at this matter on the basis of substance and form and so on, clearly there's a problem. Now, my brother, friend, and comrade, Alhaji Musa, talks about large numbers of people who took part in the anti-Janta, demonstration. Fair enough. I mean, you can't take it away from the people and so on. But you see, in Ghana, I took part in organizing what has come to be known as the biggest demonstration in the country's history. What were the numbers? The estimate was 100,000 people. That was the estimate. Now, this is a country of 32 million people. What does that tell you? So for aesthetics, for a certain show of force and so on, you can organize a big demonstration. And Mali is smaller than Ghana, I presume. Mali is much, much smaller than Ghana. So if you put 20,000 people on the streets, it's huge. It draws attention and so on. But is that really an indication of what the people feel and want? I'm not sure. And we cannot dwell on that. Okay. Now, for me, the other important thing is that today we know as fact that NATO, the United States of America, and other reactionary centers of power in the world are doing everything in their power to topple the governments of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Because they see them as a bad example. These are the governments which have driven them out of their military bases and so on. There's a government which is insisting, these are governments which are insisting on national sovereignty. These are governments which are insisting that the natural wealth of the people should belong to the people and be exploited in the interest of the people. So it's important to raise the question, to what extent are these hostile forces involved in the machinations which appear like popular demonstrations against, this government and so on? Of course, you cannot ignore the fact that ECOWAS itself is also, batting for the restoration of the so-called multi-party democratic order and so on. Now, I've looked at these 3 countries, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And it seems to me that the most stable, most focused, most purposeful is the Burkina Faso, experiment. Okay? In Mali, for example, had to dismiss is prime minister because of some tendencies, neo-colonialist tendencies that he displayed. In Niger, there's a prime minister in place who does not appear to be fully in sync with the revolutionary aspirations of the Alliance of Revolutionary States and so on. So all kinds of things are happening in this country. But it seems to me that the main force driving this process of delinking the national economies of the 3 countries from the colonial metropolis is Burkina Faso and its leader. I think it's important for all of us to sit back, wait and see, and see how these processes which are beginning to unfold in the 3 countries, will be sustained, and the extent to which they would impact developments in the sub-region. I have one advice to offer these leaders in these 3 countries. You see, you cannot sustain a revolution without creating a mass base. And if these patriotic revolutions which are breaking out in these 3 countries are to be sustained, it becomes important for the current interim leadership to build mass democratic, popular basis of support. As if they don't do that, all these kinds of forces, petty bourgeois forces, neo-colonial forces, in collaboration with foreign interests and so on, would gang up and begin to orchestrate demonstrations and so on in order to insist on a return to bourgeois democracy. And in the final analysis, it may not be in the interest of the popular masses, you know, in these countries. So the most important thing now is how to build popular mass base for the patriotic revolutions that are unfolding. In fact, I even insist that it should not just be the building of popular mass base, but armed popular mass base, because of the peculiar circumstances in these countries. These are countries which are facing insurgency. Sometimes I say Islamic insurgency and people object and so on. But there's a very high level insurgency which is brewing in these countries. And you cannot combat the insurgents if the population is not armed and mobilized fully in support of government. So the need to build a popular armed mass base as part of the effort to promote the patriotic revolution in these countries is imperative. You know, so I'll leave my comments here.
All right, thank you very much, Comrade Pratt. You two can be a part of today's conversation. Let me know your thoughts. Text line has been displayed on your screens. Share with me your opinions on the topics that we have tabled for today's discussion. On the front page of today's edition of The Inside, the banner headline, Looming Danger, Atuguba worried over politicization of judiciary governance system. William Atuguba is a retired Supreme Court judge. He's been speaking on events that have unfolded relative to the Supreme Court, and his past comments on the recent case that Honorable Asafua took to the Supreme Court to, for the president to reinstate the Chief Justice Gertrude Tokono. Let me read a portion of what he has said. According to him, he says, I'm telling you, this country, if we are not able to exorcise political poison from our governance system, will continue to suffer. Before her suspension, when the process was commenced for her removal, and Godfrey Dami and others brought suits and injunction, who empaneled the suspended Chief Justice? She had no interest in her own matter, he said. In an effort to provide clarity on how judges are empaneled to preside over cases, the legal luminary explained that it is the Chief Justice who is responsible for selecting the panel of judges. He maintained that suspended Chief Justice Gertrude Tokono had a vested interest in her own case and influenced the empanelment by selecting judges to hear the matter involving her. Empaneling involves picking and choosing who to sit, and you think she had no interest in that? Of course. There have been some decisions saying that the Chief Justice is the only person who can empanel if she's around. With hindsight, I think that those decisions have to be looked at again. The fact that so long as the Chief Justice is in office, he or she must do the empaneling. They quote the provision that makes her the head of administration and the judiciary, but they overlook the introductory work subject to the provisions of this constitution. It's not just you are the head of the administration, and even if that subject were not there, it will be implied, because in Article 1 and so forth, all powers are to be exercised in the interest and for the welfare of the people. So any step that detracts from that is unconstitutional, he explained. So he spoke a lot on this whole issue, and he believes that it is high time we depoliticized Ghana's judiciary. Again, let me start with Honorable Yunusa Hussaini.
Yesterday's interview of His Lordship Justice William Atuguba was not only revealing, but it was deeply worrying, to the extent that it also confirmed what we had always suspected was happening at the Supreme Court. In fact, the quotation you read can be tied to another statement he made, that probably if the Chief Justice had her way, in empaneling the courts, the decision would have been 5-0 in her favor, or in favor of not removing the Chief Justice by the processes initiated. Clearly showing that the Chief Justice, or implying that the Chief Justice, while in office, manipulated her power of empanelment to secure outcomes that she desired. And that is, I mean, if that was not part of the petition, anybody watching the interview will be interested in bringing the petition for that, because the manipulation of the empaneling process to secure a desired outcome is stated misbehavior. It's stated misbehavior. Now, again, in that interview, it clearly showed the hypocrisy of the MPP. And he asked a fundamental question, and that ties in neatly with what Comrade Koku has just discussed in terms of Mali and democracy. For all the time that the court was returning a verdict of 5-0, 7-0, 11-0, was it democracy? Was it fair? The people who are now criticizing the process to remove the Chief Justice, did they see that? You mean they didn't have concerns at all? How come that they were not dissenting opinions? How come that all the judges that were empaneled somehow agreed with each other that this was the way they were going to treat it? Now, long before Justice William Atuga spoke, I had said in the Judicial case that it appeared to me that our Supreme Court was practicing a jurisprudence of convenience, because they were now introducing legal precepts and principles that were unknown to a very large extent in the jurisprudence of Ghana, and particularly in the common law jurisprudence, because that very Supreme Court has said that representation was, in the Judicial case, before the Judicial case, our very Supreme Court has said that where representation is so important that you cannot exclude people who have been elected into Parliament from sitting in Parliament and transacting business for and behalf of their constituents who voted them into office until the court comes to a contrary decision. The Supreme Court. That unless the court decides or determines that the person who is otherwise in Parliament presently representing the people was not validly elected, there is no reason, because of the importance of representation, to exclude a person from Parliament. That was a decision that we were all operating with, and everybody knew that if you went to court to restrain a member of Parliament from sitting in Parliament and transacting business for on behalf of the constituents who elected him, nothing will get him out of Parliament until the court ruled that his election was null and void. But what did we see in Judicial? Even though there was an appeal pending at the Court of Appeal, even though the election, the challenge to the election of Judicial was not on the basis of the votes counted, but on the basis of a supposed law, a law that made it unconstitutional for a person to be elected to Parliament while that person was holding dual allegiance, or allegiance to another country, dual citizenship or allegiance to another country. even though the fact of the case proved that this objection of Judicial to contest the elections was first of all brought before the Election Management Committee or the Election Management Body, the Electoral Commission, and the Electoral Commission had decided that Judicial was otherwise qualified because they were satisfied with the evidence produced by Judicial. The court said no and restrained Judicial. Now, what did we see when 3 of the members of the MPP were excluded, were expelled from Parliament because they had taken up the forms to contest on a ticket other than the ticket that they were elected into Parliament? They rushed. The majority then rushed to the Supreme Court, and within the twinkle of an eye, on a Friday, an injunction was filed, a motion was filed, and an injunction was granted against Bagwen, or the Speaker, excluding those people from Parliament on a Friday. And you see clearly that, and then nobody, those who are now condemned, including the Bar Association, nobody saw anything wrong with this. And even that injunction, which was supposed to be an interim injunction, had no expiry date. It was almost granted in perpetuity. Nobody saw anything wrong with it. That is the concern and worry of His Lordship Justice William Atubuga. And I agree entirely with him that our governance system has somehow infiltrated the judiciary, and interference in the judiciary is not a matter of perception. It was very apparent during the time of Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo's tenure in office that there was blatant interference. And I have said elsewhere, the NDC as a political party has never felt the need to recruit the judiciary into their corner for the purposes of governing this country. Yes, of the 11 chief justices that this country has had since 1992, NDC has appointed only 1. And even that one, the MPP ran to court to remove him. Justice I.K. Aban. They ran to court to remove him. And it's just that they didn't succeed. So clearly, you will see that for the MPP, they have always believed and acted in a way that creates the impression that when you have the judiciary on your side, you can rule with impunity. Now, and what is nauseating and disturbing is that when Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo directed his secretary to write to Parliament, to the Speaker, the clerk of Parliament, directing him to desist from transmitting the bill that was passed by Parliament, cease and desist, the cease and desist order. The Bar Association saw nothing wrong with it, even though there is no constitutional procedure that warrants the writing of such a letter. There's no constitutional procedure. And if anybody listening to us on Pan-Africa things that at the time Nana Akufo-Addo's secretary wrote to the clerk of parliament ordering him to cease and desist from transmitting the bill that was passed by parliament to the president for signature, that person can draw our attention to that provision of the constitution that allows that to happen. But nobody, and particularly civil society, saw anything wrong with that. And when even the matter was challenged in the Supreme Court, what did we see? The Supreme Court just became a sitting duck, knowing very well that the bill's life is tied to the life of Parliament. The bill that was passed by Parliament, its life was tied to that of Parliament. And I had said, and I was convinced, and I've come to be proven right, that the Supreme Court was going to do absolutely nothing about the bill until the expiration of Parliament. And that if Parliament, the tenure of Parliament expired, the bill would definitely lapse. And that was all. And that's what happened. Now, so when you look at all these things, was it by coincidence? Or it was simply a calculated attempt by the judiciary to ensure that Nana Akufo-Addo got his way? That's what Justice William Atuga was talking about. That's what he was talking about. Yes, even the Chief Justice herself. Even though admittedly, Justice Atuga said, well, there appeared to be no rule that says that only seniors must be elected to the highest position in the judiciary. But of course, if you frog leap a junior onto the highest position, it disturbs the discipline and morality at the judiciary, disturbs the stability. And so, for me, we need to take what Justice Atuga has said seriously. It's pointed, they are pointers. And he somehow predicted that they will come after him. He mentioned the name. And this morning when I was scanning the news, I heard that person or I read that person speaking. And clearly, he knew that they will come after him. But well, what do you fear if you are speaking the truth? The truth does not fear conversation. Truth does not fear conversation. Because you say it as it is. The defining thing in the interview was that he was also convinced beyond doubt that the president, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, in accordance with his oath of office and the duties imposed on him by Article 146 of the Constitution, had not erred in the processes that have been initiated for the removal of the Chief Justice. And I was very comforted that we had said, and when he read Article 1 of the Constitution, it further gave me hope and confidence that all that we have been saying about the limits placed on the process in Article 146 actually derives from Article 1 of the Constitution. The linkage became very clear after he recited Article 1 of the Constitution. And so, we need people to speak up, people like Justice Atuga to speak up. I know he will be insulted, attacked, bastardized. But like I said, truth has never been afraid of conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Inusa Fuseni. Justice Atuguba also took a swipe at the NPP, and before I come to Comrade Pratt, if I can be permitted to read just a line or two of what he said. He said, meanwhile, William Atuguba has taken a swipe at the opposition New Patriotic Party for the strong resistance he has mounted against the suspension of Chief Justice Gertrude Araba Saki Tokono. Sharing his views on the matter, Justice Atuguba criticized the NPP, accusing the party of hypocrisy in its stance on the Chief Justice's suspension. According to him, the party during its tenure in government acted in ways that were not in the interest of Ghanaians and was dishonest in its dealings. He therefore questioned the NPP's moral authority to criticize developments surrounding the processes intended to remove the Chief Justice from office. How were they when they were in office? How did they perform? Transparently, neutrally, in the interest of the people. Did they do that? This is the kind of thing I just hate. That is pure hypocrisy. Apart from hypocrisy, the exclusion of honesty of public interest in our political space is very troubling. Justice Atuguba did not mince words in his criticism of the NPP, highlighting how the Supreme Court came under public scrutiny for perceived partisanship due to the outcome of rulings during their party's tenure in office. He referenced the period leading up to the 2024 elections, during which the court was mockingly referred to by the public as unanimous FC. Right. Comrade Pratt.
Well, to be quite honest, a certain degree of bias, political, social, cultural, whatever, is expected in all human institutions. You see, those who sit on the bench, especially at the Supreme Court, are not angels from outer space. They are like us. They were born into our society. They went through processes of acculturation. And process of acculturation establish biases. They have their political leanings, and political leanings are biases. So just the process of being human, of growing up, of living in society, of harmonization with institutions and so on, creates biases. But we need to cure these biases in order for justice to appear to be delivered. Okay? And that is why, if you look at the court system, we have established a hierarchy of courts. You go to the magistrate court, if you don't get justice, you can go to the circuit court. If you don't get justice, you can move on all the way up to the Supreme Court. Now, when you get to the level of the Court of Appeal, instead of one judge, there are 3 judges. The assumption is that the bias of 1 or 2 may be tempered by the bias of the 3rd. And so that's the assumption. Now, when you go to the Supreme Court, sometimes 5 of them sit, sometimes 7 of them sit, sometimes the whole bench sits. And that is why you have decisions like 3-2, 4-3, and so on. So it is that process, the numbers and so on, which is meant to ensure that the biases are tempered. We recognize that the bias exists, but then the biases are tempered by increasing numbers and so on. Now, the apparent, and I'm using my words very carefully, the apparent neutrality of the judiciary is important in the administration of justice. As if the people do not have confidence in the judiciary is useless. The powers exercised by the judiciary, the Supreme Court, is exercised on behalf of all the 32 million people of Ghana. And that is why it is important for the people of Ghana to have confidence in that system. Okay. So, politicians ought to be careful, judges ought to be careful in order to preserve this veneer of apparent neutrality. And I'm choosing all my words so very carefully. Veneer of apparent neutrality. So there are things which are no-no-nos in the judiciary. You see, when you appoint somebody who was a parliamentary candidate of a political party 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago onto the Supreme Court, you are not helping the Supreme Court. Because his bias is in our face. You understand? It's in our face. You are not even making any effort to conceal bias. You are demonstrating bias. You are putting bias in our face. That's one of the problems. If you look at the current, conflict over the processes for the removal of the Chief Justice, the aesthetics are not good at all. The aesthetics are terrible. I mean, how come that Chief Justice Tokon, even though it is within her right to appoint any legal representatives and so on, ended up with only MPP people in her defense? It's not against the law. It's not a crime. But the aesthetics are not good. You understand? This is clear, transparent politicization of a case before the court. Now, I've had the privilege of listening to several key members of the New Patriotic Party argue their case in the public arena. And to be honest with you, I'm completely shocked. I mean, last Tuesday, I heard the head of communications of the New Patriotic Party, my very good friend, what's his name? Richard Ayaba, argue publicly on radio that, look, as far as they are concerned, this case is not about legality and constitutionality. That's exactly, he says, this is politics. And he says that, look, if you follow this case on a legal basis, on basis of constitutionality and so on, it is difficult to fault the president. And it is only when you get into a political realm that you make capital. What a statement. So all that we are doing is about needless, useless politicking. Now, if the case is not about legality and constitutionality, why is it before the courts? Why is the case before the court when it's not about legality, when it's not about constitutionality? I can't understand. And he's not the only person making this argument. Now, listen. When the NPP realizes that it didn't have a solid legal and constitutional basis, what did they do? They dropped the pretense. And now they are mobilizing people on the basis that these judicial changes, if they occur, would enable President Mahama to run for a third term. What crass nonsense. What crass nonsense. First and foremost, President Mahama has never declared anywhere that he wants to run for a third term. I haven't heard anybody of repute and substance in the NDC or even outside the NDC advocating for a third term for President Mahama. Now, if you ask them where they are getting that jive from, what they tell you is that, oh, it's speculation. Some say that, oh, we have ears on the ground and so on. Look, this country must not be pushed on a merry-go-round, simply because some people had a bad sleep. And in their bad sleep, they had bad dreams. And so, it must be based on substance. You understand? Now, one of the things that we can do in order to create the appearance of neutrality, the appearance of neutrality of our courts, is simply capping the limit of numbers which can be appointed onto the bench. As we sit here, if you have 20 Supreme Court judges and you have a new government which has a case before the Supreme Court, you can simply increase the number to 41 and it will be constitutional. And so this is what we need to cure. Now, if you cure this, and there's a clear limit about the numbers of persons who can be appointed onto the apex court, what happens is that over time, governments would lose the ability to influence the conduct of the apex court through appointments. Because then government will only have the chance to replace those who have retired or those who are infirm, on the basis of their faculties and so on, or those who misbehave or display open incompetence. And that way, a certain level of stability is achieved and so on. So I believe that, look, no matter what constitution you have, it is human beings who operate the constitution. And if those human beings are insincere, if those human beings have no commitment to a certain ethos of government and so on, you would always have problems. I believe that very strongly. But the constitution, the law itself, must also provide limits within which we can function. And I believe very strongly that the current effort at constitutional review should lead us to a point where we cap, the numbers of people who can be appointed onto the Supreme Court. I think that is an important ingredient. But listen, it's not only the courts which appear to be politicized. The armed forces, the police, everywhere. Yeah. And it's a dangerous situation. And you remember that early this year, I made the point that political parties should be very, very careful about this clamor to remove persons in the public and civil service and to replace them with only those who bear party cards. It's an unnecessary aberration. It can have dangerous consequences for governance. It can have dangerous consequences for our effort at building some kind of democratic culture, limited democratic culture. You understand? So there are steps that we ought to take, and the most important step is to cap the numbers of people who can be appointed onto the apex court.
Thank you. Let me take time to read some messages our viewers have shared. Good morning, Bless. It is quite unfortunate some Ghanaians are refusing to analytically analyze what the NPP is doing. They are trying to set a tone, so when or if any of their members falls foul of the law and is persecuted, it will be described as witch hunting. So they are running scattered just to use public sympathy when NPP corrupt officials come face to face with the law of the land. Bruce from Mampontein. Thank you, Bruce, for your message. Good morning to you. When the military, this one says, when the military rule, they don't want to leave power. A good example is Adama of Togo and other places who came as military men and ruled for many years and have passed it on to their sons. When a military comes, then they try to manipulate power. When a civilian comes, the government or its appointees are corrupt. Why? What at all is man looking for in this world? Okay, thank you. Aaron from Oyarefa, thank you so much for your message. Hello, Pan-African TV. The partisan politics of the GBA is very nauseating. What was their response when the former AG, one of their seniors, was caught live on tape coercing a key witness to fabricate a lie to the EC in the Atufosen Jakba ambulance trial? Abdulaziz from Accra. Thank you, Abdulaziz. Good morning, sir. It's sad. It's sad NPP has learnt nothing from their shameful defeat. Instead of showing remorse for their sins against pensioners, they still insult and misbehave and assault policemen, stab one another. Lost ECG continues to cause them so and vandalizing properties in parliament, etc. They must mend their ways and apologize for their atrocities against the people and stop dreaming of a comeback. They don't deserve it. Indeed, victims of their oppressive rule are still alive to give them a knockout in 2028 because Jane Mensah and her vote Reagan Mafia will not be there to recollate in their favor. Ken Williams sent this one. Thank you, Ken. Good morning, please. Can you address the issue concerning payment of the EC officials for the 2024 elections? We have still not been paid. Thank you. You didn't tell me your name, but I've been receiving lots of messages relative to this discussion about the 2024 elections and the fact that the Electoral Commission has not paid people. Right. This one here says, good morning, bless. Afenyo Markin is a bad example to the Ghanaian youth. A lawyer, a lawmaker, and a leader of minority in parliament allow his members to vandalize parliament's property, also slap the police officer. A lack of proper bringing. Okay, all right, thank you. You didn't tell me your name. In fact, the suit against Judicial has made me lose respect for our judges, especially the Supreme Court of Ghana. Article 94.2 states that if you are an MP, you can't owe allegiance to any other country apart from Ghana. Judicial was a Ghanaian in November 2020 and took his oath of office as an MP on January 7, 2021. What disqualified him as an MP? Koku from La Paz is asking that question. Article 31.2 to 3, a casual reading of 31 to 3 shows that the president must act immediately and parliament must approve or revoke the proclamation later within 72 hours. No mention of a CI, because requiring a CI which matures in 21 sitting days would make the declaration of an emergency impracticable, even dangerous. Anytime CI is required, the constitution states it. Get me? Okay, all right. Thank you, Kwesi. Okay, all right. Thank you so much for your message. Good morning, Koku. So what at all is with we Africans? When we have a democratic government, there's corruption. When there's military rule, then trouble too. So what do we do with our leaders in Africa? So why can't we sit down for once and do things that will help us as a people? Is it a case or what? I can't think far. And okay, all right. Thank you for your message. I'll read 2 more. Then we proceed to our next topic for conversation. Hello, greetings to you all. I'm Mosquito from Medina. Honorable Atufosin didn't declare his assets and he must resign, and the dollar will rise again. All right, let me read this final one. Hello, good morning to you and your panel. I'm Kelly from Shire Hills. Please, let's organize a demonstration for Operation Alormasor, and it must start this month. Okay, all right. Thank you very much for your messages. Keep them coming. As I earlier stated, we are live on. I see scores of you have joined us on YouTube. There are many of you watching us on YouTube this morning. Thank you so much. You can also share your thoughts via YouTube. Also on Facebook, we are live at facebook.com/Pan-African Television. It's been 120 days of President John Dramani Mahama. We'll be looking at that again. Honorable Yusuf Hussein is a member leading member of the National Democratic Congress. Let's have an assessment of the president's first 120 days in office, the promises he made, and what he's been able to do, what he will do, and what he hasn't done. Honorable.
So, the 120-day concept is a departure from what we are used to in this country, especially under the Fourth Republic. Under the Fourth Republic, the promises had been for the first 100 days. But when we're going into election 2024, during the time that the NDC was writing its manifesto, we came up with a concept of 120 days. That is the first quarter. Now, the first 4 months, the first quarter. Now, so when we said, well, in 120 days, there will be sufficient time to be able to do certain things to assure the country that we were doing things in the right manner, that we're on a sound pedestal, that the trajectory was good, and if we followed through the trajectory, this was what Ghanaians could expect of the government. We condensed those things that we could do in the 120 days into a promise to the people, and clearly for the people to hold us accountable for the things that they had promised. And the promises were 25. The 25, starting from the setting up of government. And most governments have taken more than 1 month to set up the government. Well, famously, Buzia even took more than 1 month. It took about 6 months to set up government. Now, John Dramani Mahama said, in 14 days, his government will set up a cabinet. Indeed, that promise has been delivered. That his government, his cabinet was set up in 14 days. All the nominations of his cabinet ministers were completed in 14 days. Now, he also promised to run the leanest government in the history of this country. And that has been delivered. In fact, as we speak, he still got about 4 ministers to appoint, ministers or deputy ministers to appoint. So he's not even done with the 60 ministers. That shows integrity. That shows credibility of His Excellency. That he said, oh, we'll run this country with fewer ministers and improve upon the efficiency of delivery. Nana Akufo-Addo in his first term ran with about 126 ministers. The president currently is running with 56 ministers. Just do the mathematics. Dr. Abu Sankara says he should focus on reducing the burden on the people of Ghana. Just look at the mathematics and you will understand the burden that His Excellency John Dramani Mahama has lifted off the people of this country. The burden in terms of vehicles that he would have bought if we were running the 126 ministers of state, the burden of salaries that he would have paid if you were running 126 ministers, the burden of fuel that he would have given to the ministers, the burden of creating offices for those ministers, all of the perks of office would have been charges on the consolidated fund. The fact that they are not charges on the consolidated fund now is a relief to the people of this country, because we would have been paying through the taxes that we have paid. Now, again, John Dramani Mahama said, look, corruption has been nauseating. We want to deal with corruption. So we are going to enhance transparency in government and accountability. And so I'm going to launch a code of conduct for all my appointees, including myself. That has been done. You know what? People forget easily. In 2017, by this time, by 4 months' time, we're already dealing with not less than 3 scandals of the Nana Akufo-Addo government. The first scandal was the contamination, the 5,000 liters bus fuel. Do you remember? That came within 30 days after Nana Akufo-Addo had assumed office. You remember the Eurobond, the first Eurobond, that was done without the approval of the Attorney General. You remember? You remember the attack on the court in Kumasi? You remember? So far, the ethical leadership displayed by His Excellency John Dramani Mahama has prevented at least the people of this country from witnessing that corroding influence of corruption in his government, which results in loss of trust in political office holders. In fact, 2 days ago, when His Excellency, in pursuance of his ethical leadership, launched of the Code of Ethics and delivered to the government gifts that he had been given as a demonstration of the fact that his officers and appointees, when they receive gifts, must disclose, and the gifts must be returned to the state. Now, I heard people, and then his administrative punishment of the people who had failed to comply with his directive to declare their assets by the end of April. I had many people say that His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, including His Lordship Justice Atubwa, should have allowed the Constitution to take its course. But they had simply not read the law. The Constitution says within 3 months, but the law says that you must declare your assets. Section 1 of the Declaration of Asset Law says you must declare your assets upon the assumption of office every 4 years and the end of leaving office. And D, in any case, not later than 6 months after assuming office. So the appointees had not breached any law. They have not at all breached the law, except that they had breached the presidential directive to declare their assets. And because of the leadership that John Dramani Mahama wants to implant in his appointees, he subjected them to administrative sanctions. Again, when people say, well, they should have left it to the Constitution to deal with them, I say, well, probably they don't learn from history. When Jane Mensah was appointed EC, she failed, refused, or chairperson of EC, she failed, refused, or neglected to declare her assets until a petition was lodged with the Shiraj Commission for Human Rights and Administrative Justice. It was during the investigation of the case that Jane Mensah declared her assets. There was a clear breach. But what did Shiraj do? Shiraj only reprimanded her. So if the Constitution is anything to go by and precedence is anything to go by, the appointees of John Dramani Mahama, if they were referred to Shiraj, would have only suffered the reprimand and asked to go and declare their assets. But ethical leadership, honesty, integrity, credibility is what moved the president to imposing administrative sanctions on his appointees as a clear signal that insubordination will not be tolerated under his government. Anim Yabua was the Chief Justice. You know, when Anim Yabua was appointed Chief Justice, you know, he did not declare his assets. Again, when his conduct was the subject matter of an investigation at Shiraj, that was when he went and declared his assets. He was only reprimanded. He didn't lose his seat, he didn't lose his position. In any case, the president had given a further directive that any appointee who failed to comply with the directive by the 7th of, that is yesterday, will suffer the consequences for the failure. And the consequences will be losing the job. So clearly, there's total satisfaction on the way John Dramani Mahama has started with his second term in office. Today, the dollar, in time past, the dollar was locked in the cell and the keys given to the IGP, but the dollar managed to escape. Today, the dollar has not been locked in any distance. Prudent economic management led by the Bank of Ghana's monetary policy, Atuforson's, they say autonomics, Atuforson's economic leadership at the Ministry of Finance, and the fiscal policies of this government, and the Koku board, the gold board activities have combined to stabilize our dollar. And today, the dollar is trading less than 14 cedis. Do you know what that means? That translates into benefits to fixed salary earners. The purchase price parity of fixed salary earners have been increased just because the cedi is stabilized. What you used to buy with your monthly salary when the dollar was 17 cedis or 16 cedis a dollar, you can buy more now that the dollar is about 14 cedis. Means that there is an improvement. Your burden has reduced because of the value of your salary now. And so governments were not elected to do one thing at a time. The one thing they did was just to give an indication of the trajectory of government, of the vision and mission of government. So far, about 80%, before John Dramani Mahama delivered his statement, launched the Code of Ethics, it was 72%. Since then, the Code of Ethics has been launched, the Black Star Line experience has been done, and many other things. So clearly, 18 promises had been fulfilled by May 5th. So now, today as we speak, more than 21%, 21 of the promises out of 25 have been fulfilled. So we are above 80%. If you were in the university, if this were an examination, John Dramani Mahama would have been given an A+.
Thank you very much. Comrade Pratt.
Well, some very significant things have happened, within the last 120 days. And there are some things that the president has done which are clearly commendable. But I must emphasize that there is still some work to be done to improve the quality of what has been done already, and also to expand what has been done already. You see, for the first time since 1992, we've had a president sanctioning those who could not declare their assets. It's never happened before. And he's sanctioning them for not declaring their assets even ahead of the stipulated time. Because the Constitution gives 6 months. We are not 6 months yet. And he still says that, look, you haven't declared your assets as at March 21 or thereabout, and therefore you're losing 3 months' salary. And he gave them a new deadline of up to yesterday, and he said, if you don't, I'll fire you. That is something which is commendable. Even though some suggest that it could have been done better, but this is the first time it's being done, and we need to recognize that. Now, why do they say that it could have been done better? If you read the Constitution, the mandate for dealing with that infrastructure is the mandate of the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice. So they're saying that the president could have referred, the issue to the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice as a way of strengthening institutions, constitutional institutions and so on. There are problems there too. One, the Commission would have looked at the Constitution to see whether there's been a constitutional violation, and there's no constitutional violation. The violation that exists is one of not adhering to the president's instruction or order to his appointees. It's not a constitutional violation. And therefore, I'm not so sure that Shraj could have performed. You understand? But that argument has been made. Now, what is interesting is that since 1992, I'm not aware of any instance where Shraj has sanctioned anybody even for the blatant constitutional violation. You understand? There have been cases about the chairperson of the Electoral Commission not declaring her assets in time. There have been cases about judges of the Supreme Court not declaring their assets in time and so on. In all of this, Shraj did not take any punitive measures, and so we can look at it. Now, interestingly, the Code of Ethics has also been launched, and that's very interesting. Okay. I think that the Code of Ethics can be improved in order for us to have an empirical basis for assessment. For example, the President says in the Code of Ethics that no appointee should accept a gift which has a value of more than $20,000. You know. Now, there's a problem there. The problem there is that, yes, you have 24 hours in a day. That $20,000, 20,000 cedis, what is the time limit?
Yeah.
Is it 20,000 cedis for the 4-year period that you'll be president? Is it for a month or is it for an hour? Because without that clarification, an appointee can accept a gift of $20,000 in the morning, in the afternoon accept another gift of $20,000, and in the evening accept another $20,000, and may not be deemed to be in violation. He can accept every month 20,000 cedis and would not be deemed to be in violation. So it's important to clarify that, you know. It's absolutely important to clarify that. Now, there are some who have also raised questions about the president's own surrender of 2 vehicles that he says were given to him as gifts. And they're saying that, oh, maybe we should have been more transparent. We should have known those who gave the gifts. You know. Well, that's an interesting thing which has been raised. Maybe it would be useful if he did. But it doesn't detract from the fact that the Code of Ethics has been launched. It doesn't distract from the fact that appointees of the president are expected to live within a certain, you know, frame, you know. And I think that you cannot, what we can say is that we need to improve, you know, we need to further define the parameters and so on. But something has been done which is good. Now, with regards to assets declaration itself, it has had many problems which I've discussed since 1982. One of the key problems has been the constitutional provision, which does not compel spouses of appointees to declare their assets. And since 1992, we've been arguing that spouses ought to declare their assets. Now, this is an area we may want to look at as a way of improving what has been done.
Yeah.
You understand? What has been done is good, it's acceptable, it's a fulfillment of a promise that the president made to the country, but maybe there are areas we can look at, you know, in order to ensure that there is some very significant improvement, you know. Now, this morning, I'm reading the newspapers, and I'm being told that the rate of inflation has gone down again. In fact, the recent drop is at 1.2%. Now, since January, this is the 5th time that the rate of inflation has dropped. Something is happening. Something interesting is happening, you know, and so on. There's a long list of persons who are being investigated, who are likely to be prosecuted, and so on. I don't take pleasure in prosecutions and so on. I don't take pleasure. But it's a necessary thing which has to be done if we are to build a country which is based on the principles of probity, accountability, and transparency. So it is interesting. Now, over the years, we have been insisting that those who are responsible for senseless violence against citizens and so on should be held to account. Like Ayawaso West Wogon, you know. I mean, on the 3rd anniversary of Alormasor West Wogon, I was invited along with President Mahama to speak to the victims. And I was horrified. I mean, people who would never walk again. People whose lives have been destroyed. And the only crime they committed was to exercise their constitutional power to vote. And hoodlums, were set upon them. They fired them and so on. Those people ought to account. And I'm happy that the president is saying that ASP Azugu is cooperating with the investigating authorities and that the facts are being established and that something will be done about it. It's interesting and so on. So that is also something which is being done. The other thing which for me is significant is just the mere fact that the president has appointed less than 60 ministers. He promised to work with 60. He has appointed less than 60. And that's a fulfillment of a promise. And I believe that we can run this country with even less than 50 ministers if we want to. I mean, if you look at the cabinet that Nkrumah appointed, I think it was less than 40. And yet they ran this country, and the best achievements of any government is within that period. So I think that we can prune the number down, But then a promise has been fulfilled. The number has been reduced from 120 or so to 60 is significant, you understand? And I'm happy that these things are happening. Progress is being made along these lines. There is some talk about agriculture, how to industrialize agriculture. I think it's reasonable. If it's done properly, it would help to make us, cut our dependence on foreign sources for food and so on. So I think that that's also a very sensible thing which has been done. Then he spoke about what is being done in order to implement the dream of a 24-hour economy. I want to wait for the full rollout to occur to be able to make a determination. Because I do know that one of the major problems that the 24-hour economy is likely to encounter is power supply. And our power supply has not been stabilized yet. And I'm waiting to see what can be done in order to stabilize power supply. Of course, one of the huge problems is the level of indebtedness of the power sector. And this is not a matter which can be resolved in 2 weeks or in 3 months, So I'm willing to wait to see what can be done in order to strengthen that. I think that one of the things that we can do, immediately is to use diplomatic means to strengthen our relations with some specific countries. And one of the countries that comes to mind immediately is Algeria. Algeria has the capacity to supply us with all our energy requirements, at very favorable conditions and so on. So we needed to make an effort to improve relations with Algeria as a means of helping to redress this shortfall in the production of energy, especially electricity. Unfortunately, the previous administration dealt us a big blow, before they left office, by suspending relations with the Saudi Arab Democratic Republic. And I'm still very surprised that this administration has not been able to overcome that hurdle. The good news is that the Minister for Foreign Affairs visited Algiers, I think last week, and I've seen the communique which was issued, and the communique is very good. It sends important pointers ahead. But then we need to improve our relations substantially with Algeria, with Nigeria also. Because anytime we've run into problems with energy, it's Nigeria which has come to our rescue. And Nigeria being a member of ECOWAS, given the long-standing relations that exist between Ghana and Nigeria, we need to do a lot more to improve substantially our relations, with Algeria and so on. With Nigeria. With Nigeria. Then the other thing other achievement which has been chalked in terms of foreign relations is just the smoothing of relations with the alliance of Sahel states. And we've come to the point where the president has actually appointed a special envoy to the Sahel states. And I think that is a bold and commendable step, which the president has taken and so on. So, look, good things have happened. Alhaji Yusuf Hussaini says that about 80% has been achieved. 80% is quite high. I'm not in a position to do the percentages. I don't have the capacity to do the percentages. But a lot of good things have happened, and we wish, and we should be wishing this government well. For example, the value of the cedi has appreciated against the dollar. As at yesterday, the cedi was selling, I think about, is it 13.2, to a dollar. The argument has been made that as a result of Trump's erratic behavior and so on, the dollar is losing against all currencies. And that may be the result, that we are seeing. I'm not going to challenge that, Whatever it is, the cedi is stabilizing, inflation is dropping, and there are interesting signs. If it comes to taxation, all the obnoxious taxes have been dropped, except for the COVID levy. And the president explained yesterday that there's some intricate connection with the IMF program we are pursuing now. If I had my way, I would have abandoned this IMF program. But it's not me. I was not the person who was elected president. You understand? So be that as it may, we are waiting for the review of the value-added tax regime. And we are told that if that is reviewed, then we can get rid of the COVID tax. One other most important thing, as far as the election prejudice were concerned, is the fight against Galamsey. I don't think that anybody can say that nothing is happening. A lot is happening. There are some things that are not happening and have not happened, but still a lot is happening. I mean, one of the main things which have been said against this government is the fact that it did not repeal a certain law. I've heard Alhaji Yusuf Hussaini argue that the mere introduction of a legislative instrument and its adoption automatically repeals the existing one. I'm not a lawyer, but this is an argument that he has made very strongly. I'm ready to listen to people like him who know the law and who understands the operations of the law. But whatever it is, something is happening. There have been revocations of licenses of persons suspected to be involved in illegal mining. The military and the police have intensified the patrol, and they are urging out illegal miners in the forest reserve. I'm told that there were 9 forest reserves which had been, heavily infiltrated by these illegal miners. Out of this 9, 7 have been cleared of illegal miners. That's a significant achievement, and so on. So I'm ready to recognize what has been done, and also to recognize the need to improve even what has been done. As Comrade Abu Sakara says.
All right. Thank you very much. Comrade Kwesi Pratt, thank you very much. Honorable Yusuf Hussaini, our time is far gone. We need to go. Let me, before I leave, just 2-3 messages from our Facebook. Seth Abuchi says, please let's pardon okay, all right. Koku Kale says, bless, you are doing a good job. We are proud of you, right? Thank you. My people from Afaja to South, thank you. Prosper Mensah says, this MPP guys are just taking Ghanaians for granted. If it goes against them, they have different reasons. If it goes for them, they have different reasons. Hypocrites. Where is the GBA? Where was the GBA when the whole constituency was denied representation for 4 years? Okay. Sumaila Hamadu says Mali has 389 political parties. Okay. Staninson says God bless our homeland Ghana. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Honorable. Thank you, Comrade Pratt. And to our cherished viewers, thank you so much for your time this morning. I'll see you tomorrow. Until then, do have a pleasant day. Bye-bye.